Okay, it looks like the majority of our attendees are here. So why don't we get started? Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is how to foster everyday innovation in your organization using design thinking. This is the second part of a four-part webinar series co-hosted by BDO Canada and the Canadian Construction Association called The Power of Innovation. The purpose of this four-part series is to bring forward innovation insight, strategies, and tools to really help organizations create and sustain innovative practices in their day-to-day business. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself, your moderator for today. My name's Kyle Hume, and I have over 12 years experience advising clients within the real estate and construction sector. I've previously held the role of Assistant Vice President at RioCan REIT, and I'm currently BDO Canada's National Real Estate and Construction Consulting Leader. My focus is really helping construction companies improve their businesses, whether that be through business planning, optimizing operations, digital strategies, and/or enabling innovation. For today, what we're going to do is we're going to run through, this is going to run for about an hour, and we're going to run through about a 15 to 20 minute presentation off the top that's really going to talk about design thinking. And then we're going to follow that up with a panel discussion with 3 of our industry experts to explore further innovation insights. As we go today, if you have any questions at all, please add them to the question and answer box. And we'll answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And if we do run out of time, we'll be sure to follow up after the session with you. As we take part in today's session, to me, there's really 3 leading objectives that we hope to cover. First, I'm going to explore the shifting macro landscape of the construction sector and speak to recent innovation accelerations that are happening within the industry. The second objective is to introduce the concept of design thinking and how it can support effective problem solving. And lastly, through our panel discussion, we're going to share some great insights and strategies to help foster everyday innovation within your own organization. So with all this being said, why don't we get started? And like I said, where we're going to really start is around those recent innovation accelerations that are happening within the construction industry. I want to spend a little bit of time answering why innovation is happening and what are some of those leading industry trends. So to start that off, you're probably wondering on this slide why I have a picture of a car assembly line when we're supposed to be talking about the construction industry. And why I have this picture is because there's some corollaries between the industries that I want to share to really help kind of paint that picture of significant change that's happening within the construction industry. And I want to start that conversation by saying that there's a bit of similarity in the assets. The construction assets that are being made have many parts, and those that come from different suppliers that involve many different skilled trades and have various specifications that are based on customer needs. And to be honest, that's no different than the car manufacturing industry. So when we look at the car manufacturing industry over history, you're going to see these significant waves of change. And whether that be industrialization in the 70s and 80s, or globalization through the 90s, or now even digitalization from, let's say, early 2000s and onwards. And during this time, it's been pretty evident as well that what customers want and need in their vehicles has changed drastically as well. And these waves of change, or as I like to say, big moments of disruption, have really shifted the way cars were built and has had a drastic impact on market dynamics, and most importantly, shifted the value around the industry. And that shift of value from a business perspective is really important because it's caused some organizations to flourish and excel, and unfortunately others to fail. And when we look at the construction industry at the moment, it almost feels like all these big moments of disruption are all happening at the same time. These waves of change are disruptive, yes, but they're also providing organizations with a bit of a unique opportunity to create competitive advantage or differentiate themselves within the market that you operate in. So if we peel back the onion for a moment, I want to spend a little bit of time looking at some of these emerging trends that are causing construction disruption, really around industrialization, globalization, digitalization, and the changing customer needs. When I look at industrialization, what I'm seeing kind of what's really top of mind for me is its push towards offsite construction and on-site assembly. The permanent modular construction market share of new North American real estate construction projects has grown by greater than 45% between 2015 and 2018. So what does this really mean? Well, it means that there's more fabrication happening offsite, and that's being brought to the job site only to be assembled. From a globalization perspective, I'm seeing a lot of activity around new material technologies, such as lightweight materials, as well as when you mix that in with improved logistics capabilities and decreasing logistics costs, it's allowing for a lot more significant global supply chain. And in addition, what you're seeing is you're seeing some large construction players beginning to expand outside of their typical country borders to lay claim to new opportunities in localized markets. So what this is what's causing this is, or what's the outcome of that, is that you're seeing more increased competition with some of the more larger construction development projects. If you look in that top right-hand corner where I show digitalization, we're really seeing digitalization happening both on and off the job site. We're seeing a significant emphasis in BIM adoption increasing drastically because of COVID-19. And moreover, we're actually seeing construction companies leveraging data and analytics, unlike they have in the past, to really provide predictable business decisions. And from an on-the-job site perspective, we're also seeing wearables to monitor health and safety, and we're seeing a lot more operational tech on the job sites themselves. And last but not least, when you look in that bottom right-hand corner, I'm presenting a bit of a snapshot of what's happening from a customer needs perspective. And what I'm seeing more so now than ever is that demand for technology-enabled assets infused in those final builds. People want to be able to touch, they want to be able to manage, they want to be able to interact with the underlying assets functionality. And so you're seeing increased asks and requests for that demand of technology enabled assets. And there's also a few other trends happening around heightened cost pressures. So again, customers are continuing to focus on the emphasis of lower costs. And what's so hard right now from the construction industry perspective is you're seeing these rising costs in raw materials such as wood, as well as those labor shortages continuing to be abundant. So it's really safe to say there's a lot happening right now in terms of disruption within the industry. And that current state of the industry is shifting. And so why this is important is because innovation is kind of ripe there in the industry. There's a lot of change, there's a lot of disruption. And so there's an opportunity for organizations to continue to innovate, to take advantage of the disruption happening within the industry. And when I look at innovation, I really like to say it's the ability to counteract disruption. Whether it's a small change facing a job site, such as slow processes that are maybe eroding margins, or macro changes such as digitalization, I really see innovation as creating new ways of doing to solve for those business pain points. And that goal is really to find new ways to drive growth, or possibly find new ways to drive profit. But the idea here is to find new ways of doing things better than you are right now. And when I look at what's happening in the construction industry, it's quite apparent that there's a lot of innovation happening, and that pace of innovation continues to accelerate. When I look at JLL's recent State of Construction Tech Report in 2020, they said that more technology had been adopted in 1 year than it would normally have taken in 3 years because of COVID-19. And this adoption is really around technologies that focus on working remotely and digital collaborations amongst various stakeholders. A second key indicator of innovation within the sector was coming from a study from KPMG in 2020 that was evaluating the digital maturity of Canada's building and construction sector. And they found that 90% of the respondents said that their company was investing in digital technology to create lasting competitive advantage. So you're starting to see the Canadian building and construction sector really focusing on technology to say, how can my business be better with it? And the last kind of leading signal that I wanted to bring forward, and I think it's one of the most impactful, was a study published by Rand Contour that found that 70% of construction companies believe that those companies who do not adopt digital ways of working will actually go out of business. So what you're seeing here is an industry that's been historically, let's say, risk adverse towards change, and maybe more risk adverse towards specifically technology change, is becoming more and more open towards innovation and the adoption of technology capabilities. Now, there is a bit of a cautionary tale to tell with this. And it's that although there's a lot of innovation happening right now and it's accelerating at a rapid pace, is that there's still this word of caution that 70% of digital transformations continue to fail in organizations. And what I mean by that is it's not saying that 90%, or sorry, it's what I mean by that is it's saying that 70% of digital projects that are trying to transform the business do not actually reach the benefits that that management or the business had planned for. So in quantifying those terms, think of it as spending $100,000 on digital transformation over a year and only getting about $30,000 of realized true benefit from what you had envisioned. Now, what I have to say about this is that it's not a technology problem. The construction technology that's coming into the industry is amazing. It's disruptive. It's changing the ways of working. It's improving the industry and the businesses at large. But when you dive in and kind of double click on why organizations are failing or 70% of digital transformations are failing, it's actually the governance. It's actually the people. It's actually the process. It's actually the culture that really wraps around the technology that's causing digital transformations to fail. And that's why we're having this 4-part series, is that we're trying to bring forward strategies and insights to make sure your organizations become part of the 30% club and don't be part of the 70% club that are not getting the benefits that they desire out of their digital transformations. And so today's subject, and where I'm going to be spending my time for the rest of the presentation, is really around design thinking. And it's one of those tools that helps ensure that you're solving problems effectively and that you can ensure that you're getting the investment that you expect to get or the return that you're expecting to get out of the innovation initiatives that you take on. So with that being said, I'm going to spend some time now and shift really into the power of design thinking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is and why it's so important. But I did want to note that this is an introduction. And so I'm not going to get into too much specific details about the tools and the frameworks, but rather provide an overarching oversight into the value of design thinking and pull in some certain aspects that I think you can take and learn from and potentially apply into your own organizations. If you're interested in learning more about design thinking after this session, by all means, reach out. But what I wanted to do was share a little bit of insight of what it is, the value it provides, and some key learnings that I've taken from design thinking that hopefully you can apply within your business. So I want to start the concept or talk around design thinking with this picture. So have a look at this picture. And to me, this picture really sums up the importance of design. The friction or frustration of having to walk around that circle to reach the other end of the park was way too much for many of the citizens in this community. People decided to make their own path to remove that friction. And to be honest, this is a great example of the importance of good design versus bad design, and really stresses the importance of having a really good understanding of what that underlying user needs before building the solution. So in this case, it's really understanding what the ideal path of that community citizen would be while walking through that park. Now, applying design thinking to the construction industry is quite simple from an analogy perspective, and that is most construction companies or construction organizations within the space spend a significant amount of time designing buildings or other assets based on the direct needs of their customers. And design thinking is really about taking that same approach. It's about shifting the direction of that philosophy that you'd have being designed towards buildings and applying it inside your organization. So applying it to the ways you operate your business, applying it to the ways you collaborate with stakeholders, the ways you share information, the ways you make decisions. Just like it's designing a building for an end customer, design thinking is about focusing on the design of that process or a solution or a digital experience, and that is really optimized for that end user, whether it be that employee, that leader, or another construction stakeholder. So what I'm really saying is design thinking is all about starting with the end user in mind. So in summary, if I had to kind of capture what design thinking is that it's a framework to really help you and support you in effectively problem solving and coming up with creative solutions. It's a framework that is focused on solving problems first and understanding the challenges of the end users, and then involving them along the way to ensure that that end product or that end solution or the end thing that you're doing actually meets the needs and solves the problems of those end users that you first thought there were there. And what I have to say is that in my experience working with quite a few construction clients in this space is that a lot of times clients come to me and they say, we're looking at this technology because it can do A, B, C, D. And what they're not saying to me clearly is, why are you looking at that technology? What are you trying to solve for? what are the key challenges that your end users have that you need to fix? What are those friction points? What are those pain points? So we always recommend organizations really focus on defining out what those business objectives are and those user needs are first and foremost, rather than trying to find the technology solution and make it fit into your business. So before we get into some of the specifics of and principles around design thinking, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the value that design thinking can bring to your organization. And design thinking, through various studies and applications, it's quite evident that it brings and demonstrates tangible value, and that return on investment is measurable. And design thinking is really driving a few things. It's helping organizations reduce costs, it's providing better efficiencies, and it's actually having a profound impact on culture and behaviors in an organization, creating a culture of curiosity and creativity and problem solving. So one of the main benefits of design thinking that I think is really important is that it refocuses efforts on the early stages of problem solving. So it's about defining that problem correctly up front so that you're set off on the right path to solve for it moving forward. And that impact is clear. Organizations who use design thinking typically slash the time required for initial design and alignment by 70%. So it's delivering cost savings of about $900,000 on major projects. So what it's saying is if you spend a lot of time defining the challenges, defining the problem up front, you're getting through what your end solution needs to look like and getting alignment amongst stakeholders easily, so that you can get to your time to market faster on that product, and you're actually building a product, a service, a solution, a process that really makes an impact on the business. Another key stat that I just wanted to bring forward is that design thinking has done a great job at demonstrating the ability to get new products, new services, new experiences faster to market. And so it's actually increased profits by roughly $200,000 on small projects or up to $1 million on large projects. And the reason being is you're getting alignment and clarity up front so that you're able to move faster on projects to actually get them to your end users or get them to your customers or get them to your stakeholders faster. So you're getting profitability quicker on that project. A common quote you're going to hear around design thinking is that design thinking pays for itself. And I'm going to share a little bit of ways that you can apply design thinking in your own organization to hopefully get some of these benefits that these frameworks are providing to many organizations. So with that being said, on this slide, there's really 5 key principles of employing a design-led approach to problem solving. And what I want you to do as I'm speaking through this slide is really look and try to evaluate your own organization. So when I talk about these principles or things to consider, think about which ones you're strong in, think about which ones you might be able to improve in, or ways you can potentially apply these concepts and principles around design thinking to your own organization. There's a lot of great tools and frameworks out there that organizations can use to kind of work through these principles. And so keep an eye out for the CCA newsletter that's coming out next month. And I'll be sharing some tools and methodologies in there to help you get started with some of the principles that I'm going to be talking about right now. And so one of the first principles that I want to talk about is around empathizing. So empathizing with the end user. And this to me is probably arguably the most important element of design thinking. And I've already sort of spoken about it a little bit, but what I'm trying to get at here is that everything starts with a problem. Everything starts with what that end user is thinking, feeling, and doing in that process or that task that's causing points of frustration. And there's ways to improve it. And so I always look at trying to solve problems, or trying to empathize with that end user and trying to find innovative ways to understand where their pain points are or where their concerns are. And I always say, try to stand in the shoes of the end users. It's hard as leaders to really understand the true impact of those processes or those concerns or those points of friction. And so trying to find unique ways or talking directly to your stakeholders can have a profound impact on building something that really hits the mark with what they're looking for. When organizations are also trying to define problems, it's really important to kind of gather all that information around that, empathizing with the end user first, and then trying to reframe that into opportunities and really clarify needs. Design thinking forces you to spend a lot more time really trying to define out problem statements, really trying to dig deep on the true problems, the root cause of the problems, rather than running right to a solution. And I think this is one of the key areas where design thinking differs strategically or significantly from traditional problem solving, is that there's a lot more effort spent on really defining out the problem and getting a clear and articulate understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. It's almost like slowing things down to speed things up. Another key principle of design thinking is around ideation. And I recommend around ideation is that you bring a mixed group of individuals within your organization to work together to try to create and think of creative ways to solve the problem that you're bringing forward. So instead of just one or two individuals trying to think through ideas, or potentially senior leaders bringing ideas forward, I recommend trying to get as many folks in the room and involve folks that are close to the end users or the end users themselves, and try to figure out different ways to actually solve for the problem that you're looking for. This isn't easy, and there's a lot of different ideas that can come forward. But the idea here is to bring them all down, put them in one area, and then try to figure out which one will actually make a tangible difference and solve that challenge effectively. There's two other elements of design thinking that I just want to introduce you to a little bit. And the first is around prototyping. So when we're working with our clients, we always recommend that if they have empathized with their end user, they've defined out what their problem is, they've ideated and determined what they think they can do next or what the solution may be, is to build a prototype before moving into a large systems implementation or a large tech implementation. And the reason being is that you almost want to prove out that what you're doing is actually going to have meaningful value to those end stakeholders or that group that brought forward those pain points. And so involving them and getting them to roll up their sleeves and be active as part of the prototyping and proving out is so significant and so impactful. So we always recommend prove out a piece of the problem first, make sure it's resonating with the end users before you move into large scale implementation. And the last thing I'll bring forward around test and deliver is, and this is about full scale implementation, is that I see a lot of times organizations do a great job at really trying to define out the problem up front and involve stakeholders, various stakeholders, in trying to find out what that problem is, but they forget to bring them along the path towards implementation. And so those end users, whether they're in your organization or the stakeholders that you work with and interact with, you should try to find ways to get them involved with the implementation. Let them iterate, let them test, let them bring forward ideas on how to make the solution better. It's so important, because at the end of the day, at the beginning of this, you heard their challenges and you want the product or the service or the application or the digital experience at the end of the day to actually match to their challenge and solve that challenge that they brought forward at the beginning. So the last thing I'm going to mention before we move into our panel is just about how to get started. And one of the things I'd say about how to get started is really to hold a pain point session, or as I call it, a pain storm. And what I mean by this is getting people in your organization together and start talking about your roles, your responsibilities. Where are your friction points? Where are your pain points? And really get that whole list of them down. It's really great to kind of reflect back on the construction life cycle together, or where your roles and responsibility fit, to understand and kind of flush out where all those different challenges are. I find organizations hear a lot about pain points that are coming from stakeholders or pain points from employees, but to get them all down and then try to focus them on which ones are going to give us the best objectives or help us get to our strategic objectives. It's a powerful process that can really help kind of be a guiding light or a star of where to focus. So, if I had to guess or suggest where to start, I would say start with a bit of an ideation session on pain points that end users are feeling across your business. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for spending about 20 minutes with me to talk about design thinking and the power of innovation. And I know we've covered a lot. And at this stage, really what I want to do is move to our panel. And I want to further explore how to foster everyday innovation within the organization. And so with that being said, I welcome each panelist to say a quick hello, give a brief introduction. And then, Jess, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, happy to, Kyle. Thank you. My name's Jazz. I'm the VP of Canadian Operations for Procore Technologies. Procore is an 18-year-old business now. We're serving approximately 11,000 customers across 125 countries and have a substantial footprint here in Canada as well. Our vision is to improve the lives of everyone in construction, and our mission is to connect everyone in construction on a global platform. In essence, we eat, drink, and sleep construction. That's all we do. And it's an industry that we're all very, very passionate about. I think one of the most important things, we hope to do is modernize construction, extend some value to our customers to encourage transparency and collaboration, and ultimately improve insights and allow our customers to make better data-driven decisions, which kind of feeds back, Kyle, to what you were saying. But looking forward to getting into this discussion, and really appreciate you, Kyle, for having me on this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Courtney, do you want to say hello?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Courtney Cooper. I'm a principal at Elate Partners. So we invest in real estate and construction tech companies across North America, mostly at the early stage when companies have a product and market and are growing quickly. And in terms of my background relevant to this, I did my master's at OCAD in strategic foresight and innovation. So I studied some of the design thinking principles and sort of human-centered design. And that was actually following some work that I did at Dream, where we were doing sort of business transformation, trying to figure out how do we improve processes and leverage technology. And I got sort of exposed to the design thinking mindset with some of the consultants we used and really thought it was valuable. So I spent some time learning a bit more about that and using it in my career. So I'm a big fan. I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Excellent. And Asher.
Hey, thanks, Kyle, so much for having me. My name's Asher Raffel, and I'm the VP of Finance at Toronto Zenith Contracting Limited. We're a mid-sized heavy civil construction company, and we primarily do large civil infrastructure projects across Ontario. If you live in the GTA and you drive on any highways in the GTA, you've probably seen our signs. You've probably been impacted by us. So sorry for the traffic, but you're welcome for the improved infrastructure. At Toronto Zenith, I'm part of our senior leadership team. I work on strategizing operational improvements, and in addition to leading our finance, accounting, admin, technology teams.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll get started with some questions, and I'm going to start with a question around driving growth. I know I shared in my presentation that there's a lot happening right now within the construction industry, especially along the adoption of technology, continuous labor shortages, there's increasing project complexity, and honestly, prices of raw materials are starting to skyrocket. Despite all this, though, I'm seeing organizations continue to outpace their customers when it comes to growth, and outpace their competitors when it comes to growth. And I just wanted to ask everyone, when you look at successful companies that have grown and scaled their business faster than the market they play in, what key qualities stand out to you?
I'm happy to kick this one off. So I think there's there's many, but a couple that come to mind are clarity on around the vision and roles and responsibilities, a really clear and deep understanding of their customers, and a learning mindset. So, around clarity on vision and roles and responsibilities, it's interesting because innovation and change has a lot of ambiguity. And so I think what's really important is sort of the high level vision of the company. It can be at a company level, it can be at a division level, it can be the technology and innovation strategy. But overall, what are we trying to do? And if people understand where the company is trying to go, it gives them and your values and those types of things, and it gives them some guardrails of like, okay, we know where we're going and how we can work. And then, in terms of responsibilities, I think what's most important is how do you decentralize decision making so people know what's in their box? What are the things that I can make decisions on, and what are the things that I need to escalate, and when do I escalate? And this becomes really important when you're thinking about experimentation and trying new things and working with new groups. Like, you have to figure out what things can be done at different levels, and it's really, really hard to innovate and test things out if you need to get everyone's approval on everything and every sort of small change. And so trying to figure out where you can do those things and test and learn and then expand is, to me, sort of really really key. And, I think there's a certain term I like that's like, what is it? It's consent over consensus. So rather than trying to get everyone to to have consensus and all agree, the question is more about, are we okay to try it? Are there major risks? Like if people are going to screw up, things are not going to go perfectly, but and you're never going to get full agreement. But where can you get people to just consent and buy into trying something or trying something a new way once versus trying to get everyone to agree that it's the right.
Excellent. And it's interesting around the decision making, because I think that's one area where some organizations struggle or some individuals struggle as to, can I move faster, or do I have to slow down, or what levels of approval do I need to get to try to solve for a problem, or what's the financial budget or resources that I have to solve these problems. So Courtney, I think you bring up a really good point around the importance of being able to effectively make decisions and give people the autonomy to make decisions that align with the objectives of the organization. Jazz, anything to add on from your side?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would agree wholeheartedly with Courtney, like that notion of is the decision going to completely sink my business, or is it something that I can take on? And if it is, then let's go do it, right? Let's iterate, let's figure out what works and what doesn't work, and we can kind of, manage some of these initiatives in a petri dish, so to speak, right? So I really believe in that. I think like having a tactical mindset, just as much as a strategic mindset is really critical. I'll sort of go in a different direction here, well, in terms of like companies that I've seen that, sort of maybe outpace their competitors. And I had three things that I was really thinking about. One was the notion of visibility, the notion of leveraging tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then just organizations that do a better job of change management. And so when we look at construction organizations, when we think about visibility, we actually recently had a research report that we released. It's called What Gets Measured Gets Managed. And in that report, we asked respondents, and a lot of them were Canadian respondents, how they felt about how much visibility they had into their business, right? And the ones that we saw the highest levels of productivity and efficiency and better safety records with were the ones that had access to data and access to visibility, right? It was a clear correlation. And so when we look at companies that are outperforming, it's really like, can I trust my data? Can I interpret my data? And then can I make decisions on the back of it, right? But if I'm working in an Excel spreadsheet, or I'm working in an Excel spreadsheet plus some outdated reporting, and I've got incomplete insights, or I've got conflicting insights, or I've got insights that, contradict one another, I'm never going to be able to make a decision, and it just becomes really infuriating as an executive. When we look at AI and ML, we notice some really interesting trends, especially and I think over 50% of respondents, again, in Canada, are already using some form of AI or ML, right, which is really exciting. And we wouldn't have been saying that 2 or 3 years ago. But the fact is that when they're using those tools, they're actually sharing that data with the supply chain, right, to make everyone better, right? So they're talking to their vendors, they're talking to their suppliers, they're using that data to improve safety, and they're using that data to improve general outcomes, right, which was really, really amazing. I think it was 90% of folks who mentioned the supply chain benefit. And then finally, just change management from companies, again, that do a really good job, are companies that connect the back office and the field, right? And we see so much that there are organizations out there where the field is doing a fantastic job, but if they're not communicating a change in a contract, and we're overpaying from a finance perspective, a vendor that shouldn't have been overpaid, like good luck trying to get that back, right? That creates a lot of work in the business. So really connecting those aspects of the business, I think, is a key factor.
Yeah, it's interesting because Courtney and Jazz, I think you both are touching upon elements of culture. And it's interesting because when I'm speaking with leaders, one of the things I hear a lot of, we need to be more innovative, or we need to be better at problem solving. We need to create a culture of innovation. And under the same breath, though, I'm hearing that their employees or their teams are resistant to culture. And so resistant to innovation, and that they need to improve their culture. And so I wanted to really ask is, can you share some advice of how leaders can enable an effective culture of innovation within their own organizations?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of separate the two, right? It's culture and it's innovation. And I kind of think you have to have a culture of culture, in order to have a culture of innovation. And so I'm biased, but I think we've done a pretty good job with it at Procore, where we've created like a believable and reliable set of mission, vision, and values that the team really follows, right? And I think organizations need to think about, what do you stand for? What are you passionate about? What do you do well? What do you not do so well? And then how are you going to take your employees on that journey, right? And what values are you going to hold them to? And in addition to that, as executives, and I'm sure there's a lot of executives listening in today, as executives, how do we, create the language of culture and then model that culture as leaders so that our teams can go out into the field and they can multiply that culture, right? And that's really, really important. And it's not about sitting around a fire and singing Kumbaya, right? or any of that. And I know there's some sort of like maybe some resistance to that. But if we can just get past that and really think of it as a business driver and something that drives business outcome, it can be really critical to create an innovative culture as well, right? Yes. I was watching the Stanford Steve Jobs commencement speech yesterday, completely unrelated to this, right? But one thing he said in that was like, you have to love what you do, right? You absolutely have to love what you do, and you have to be passionate about it. And if you don't love what you do, wait until you find something that you do love and don't settle for what you're doing. And I think it's important because culture can create that type of environment for our employees. It can help construction companies recruit and retain talent, and it can help give those people purpose in their work, right? Which ultimately I believe translates into an innovative mindset. So kind of just some things to think about, but for me, it's really culture of culture.
Yeah, it seems that culture is almost a secret sauce. Those organizations that are able to instill and effectively drive culture, a meaningful impact in culture in their organizations, are the ones that almost stand out a little bit more and are able to accomplish things at a faster pace, or at a pace that might be stronger than their competitors. Asher, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I totally love what Jazz is saying, and maybe just a few more, closer to boots on the ground comments for me. I think I had two thoughts on this. The first was just being really active about changing your organization. I think that organizations that change a lot get better at change. So if that means, kind of being active about looking for areas of improvement, even if they're little areas of improvement, looking for those areas, empowering your teams to make those changes and make them frequently, or as soon as they see them, will really help everyone in the organization start thinking about change, thinking about innovation, thinking about making things better. And that kind of ties into my second one. I think you mentioned it well during your presentation, was about engaging all the stakeholders. So in our organization, everyone in the organization, down to the boots on the ground, getting them involved in identifying the problems, talking about the problems, having blue sky sessions where the focus is on coming up with what problems or what solutions you want to implement. You said in your presentation, ideate, come up with things. And then as leadership, really acting on those ideas. So I think there's organizations where leadership says, hey, give us some things to do. Ideas come up and leadership says, no, we don't want to do that, right? So show a belief and willingness in your team to implement their ideas. Don't say no to them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, innovation a lot of times is you almost think of it as this big splash or transformation, but really the most powerful innovation are the little changes that are done continuously to improve. And so it doesn't need to be time spent on something that's significant or something that you're going to set aside and only do it once and leave it. This is about creating a culture and a way of working that's about incremental small changes that add up to significant impact. Now, I'm gonna shift things up a little bit and take the conversation to a little bit of a different direction. And this is about defining problems. So I know in my presentation, I talked about problem solving and the importance of design thinking. And design thinking really tells us if you're looking at a problem, you need to really suspend your own views and really see that problem through the eyes of the user. And so I was hoping you could share some tips and tricks as to ways to help leaders define problems and potentially gather critical insights to help inform those inevitable solutions?
Yeah, maybe I can start with a few comments there, Kyle. I think for me, and I come at it from, my background is finance and my background is in construction. A big thing that I love to do is really walk a mile in the boots of the guys that we're working with. So that means, don't just ask them over Zoom or over a phone call, hey, what are you doing? Or trying to gauge what they're doing from sitting in my, comfortable office, but actually go out to the job site, walk with them, chat with them, ask them how things are doing, have them show me how they do their tasks and really understand how it works, and what the problem might be, so that I can help become part of the solution and also take them along with coming up with that solution. Really, our leadership teams also are probably the ones that have created or approved the current in place procedures and processes. So as kind of the owner of that, it's important, I think, to really disengage yourself from that, and be able to ask, why are we doing it the way we're doing it? How can we do it better? What are the critical outputs, and what's the best way of doing that, right? And I think you mentioned it well also in your presentation about continuing to elicit feedback as you go through the various phases, right? So if you've got an idea, run it by everyone, get their feedback. Hear someone say, no, that's not going to work, or hey, have you considered that? Just to make sure that the final solution really solves the problem and solves the problem for all levels.
That's great.
I can add to that a bit. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Asher said, and I think that in this industry, we've got some very solution-oriented people. Everyone just wants to solve the problem right away and get things done. There's timelines, there's budgets, like let's go. And so I think that it can be hard to spend the time sometimes on what is the problem that we're trying to solve and what is the root problem versus what are the symptoms. And so, I think that the design thinking mindset is really about asking why, 5 times or many times in a row to try to figure out what is that core problem that we're trying to solve. And to Asher's point, there's one piece is like active listening, really trying to understand why somebody feels the way they do. But on the other side, it's how do you like sort of show, don't tell, like go and sit with them. So it can be watching people on the job site and trying to have observations about what doesn't work. It can also be simple, like for reporting, when you sit down with somebody and say, okay, I create this report every week, or I generate this. What do you look at first? Walk me through like how you read this and try to understand, does it make sense? Because sometimes people are just doing work that actually nobody cares about, or you're doing something in a way that you think is valuable, and then it turns out like you could be wasting an hour on something that isn't as important or isn't as what somebody else is looking for. Or unfortunately, sometimes like there's reports that get created and then it's like 10 years later and it's like, oh, like yeah, that was an old finance guy who liked this, and that's not actually the most important thing. So I think just trying to understand why. Often people say things like, oh, well, the auditors need us to do it. It's like, okay, well, what do the auditors actually need? Is this really required? And sort of not pushing too hard, but really trying to understand, like, do we have to do things the way that they're done, or are there other ways? And you can only get there by understanding why, and then also just looking at like understanding what other people are doing at the time, what might make it easier for them. So I think those are sort of some of the things that can kind of help with sort of making sure that you're getting to the right solution. But I think Asher made an excellent point before about it sometimes people, like I've done this work before, and you talk to somebody and you're like, oh, this form doesn't seem that clear, or the way we do this, and they're like, oh, well, we actually updated that 5 years ago. And it's just like, that is too long. Like things happen way more often than that. And so like it is the culture of learning, the culture of change, figuring out how do we incorporate things like that. That is a piece of the culture that has to be part of how organizations operate. And if we just think about, oh, we're going to do this once and then it's done and big unveil, like that doesn't work. It's got to be, how do we prototype things? How do we test it out first? How do we get used to the fact that there's a lot more change today than there was, and trying to find that balance of obviously not being so inconsistent and doing so much that it doesn't feel the same, but also recognizing that we have to be change is just part of a skill and a capability that people need to develop today.
Yeah, I mean, you both bring up really good points about problem solving, and it's I said it in my presentation, and I'll say it again. It's just you almost have to slow down to speed up when it comes to defining out that problem, and that it's interesting. I do a lot of sessions with executives, and we try to break down problems, and trying to get a problem into a concise statement that everyone agrees to isn't necessarily as easy as it may feel. And so that's one thing that I think is really, really important, is to test the whys, or use the toolkit of the 5 whys, and really try to dive in and get to a clear, concise, and alignment amongst the leaders or amongst the stakeholders as to what the problem is and what's the importance of solving it. So another question I had is going to be around removing barriers to innovation. So when I'm working within organizations within the industry, I often see that one of the primary reasons why projects extend far beyond anticipated timelines of completion, or they go beyond budget, is because day jobs get in the way. And really what I mean by day jobs is that project sponsors or team members often struggle with trying to balance their day jobs with the needs and the requirements of innovation initiatives or projects. So do you have any recommendations that you can share that really help leaders manage the challenge of, let's say, balancing their day-to-day operational requirements with the successful delivery of important projects?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Kyle. I think it's a tricky thing, right? I mean, because the world is moving so fast, and you had that slide where you showed construction was doing industrialization, digitalization, globalization, and meeting customer needs in parallel at the same time, right? Because we're so late to the party from a digital transformation and other types of transformation perspective. But the other advice is pretty sage as well. Even though we've got this much coming at us, we have to still slow down to speed up. Like, I talk to a lot of contractors daily that say, hey, we'd love to invest in technology right now, but we're just moving so fast, we can't, But is that the right answer? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're just delaying the inevitable for another year or two. And so that's really the tricky part, is how do you align the resources internally with your business in order to focus on the stuff that's important, right? And in order to be successful for the long term. And I kind of look at it 3 ways. Like, one is an investment in technology. The other one is an investment in processes. And the third one is an investment in people, right? And from a technology standpoint, it's not easy, right? Buying technology is not easy. You have to understand the requirements for your business drivers, and how technology aligns effectively in order to meet or beat your objectives as a business. And that's where you can talk to a software vendor like a Procore or somebody else about that, and they can help you with that. But you can also talk to a BDO, right, who can help you identify your needs and do the right thing from a software selection perspective. The other thing that I see with failure, and you mentioned that statistic, Kyle, of 70% failure rate of digital transformation, is we don't get the C-level involved often enough, and they're not stakeholders at the table. So the C-level needs to be there, because we need to explain to them how we're going to improve margins, how we're going to improve efficiency, productivity, how we're going to improve safety. Because if we're not doing those things, we may as well not buy technology, right? And that's really important. So definitely technology, but do technology the right way. In terms of investing in your processes and your procedures, that thing you mentioned around like pain sessions, I can't remember exactly what it was called, Kyle.
Yes.
But that to me is a really great exercise. If you can bring the teams together, you can build some empathy, you can build some collaboration, and you can really understand where the teams fit into the construction lifecycle. You'll also quickly understand where your gaps are, right? And where you need to invest the time and resources in order to get better. And then finally is just the investment in people. And I think, Courtney, you mentioned this on the first answer you gave, but it's really giving people autonomy in order to make design decisions, giving them clear guidance, because ultimately you're building careers as well, right? You might have someone who's in your business who's 25 years old, who's got their entire life in front of them, but they're itching to do something really exciting with their lives. And if you give them that autonomy and you let them master the tools that they have, they're just going to, A, get an exceptional experience, and B, it just results in a better retention experience for you as a business.
Yeah, some really, really great points there. Sorry, Courtney, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to agree. I mean, I think that you touched on a lot of pieces of it. And I think that there's never going to be enough time. It's the biggest challenge is like, this is on the side of our desk. We have a day job, or you have a consultant or an innovation group. And it's really hard for them to be close to the business. So like an innovation and consultants are really good for certain things. Consultants are always good to, they can help get the board excited, to get a budget, to get a vision. Like there's a lot of things they can do, especially to get resources and the project started, and to help sort of get some clarity. But the business, they have to be involved. It's not successful if the people doing the work aren't involved. And so that means that it's kind of a job on top of your job. And so, there are ways you can try to manage that. And I think one is that you just need the business people involved. There's just no way around it. But I think that looking to people who are looking for an opportunity to step up, like for something that might be a pain for you, or something that is hard, there might be somebody on your team who maybe they're just ready, they're just almost ready. Like this is a stretch for them, but they are excited, and they will spend the time because they want to help make a difference in the business, and they want to be noticed, and they want to get to the next step. And so, are there people that would be thrilled and excited to take on leadership in one of these projects, and looking for who are.
Really, really good points there. I think you both hit on something that I think is really important, is that regardless of individuals' positions and organizations, that mindset, that creativity mindset, and giving people those capabilities to expand and excel towards innovation or doing new things to solve business problems, I think is such a powerful tool to get an organization moving in the right direction. And they also support from a culture perspective, because their peers are looking at them getting opportunities and doing new things that extend beyond their roles and responsibilities that they may not have had if they didn't kind of put up their hand and take on the tasks that they decide to do. The last question, and this is where I really want to end our conversation today, is about return on innovation or return on investment. So when we're seeing organizations make decisions as to where to spend or where to invest, there's a lot of focus on upfront costs. And it can't be looked at as upfront cost alone. It really needs to be looked at as the return on investment or the return on innovation that you're going to get from doing that project or doing that initiative. And I was just hoping each of you could provide a little bit of content or some feedback around what are some insights that you might want to give leaders to help them truly assess that return on innovation or that return on investment. And when you look at that and you answer that, you can feel free to take it from a quantitative perspective or a qualitative perspective when we look at benefits.
I can start. I mean, I think that it's really easy to say that there's like 3 or 4 things. Does this save cost? Does it save time? Does it add value? Does it generate revenue? Does it add value to customers? And then, I think sometimes it can be underestimated, but does it make the lives of your employees, your teams, your partners easier? Like, is this a huge pay point that is making people hate work or, not like working with you? And so considering sort of, the sort of simple buckets. And then, again, if you go back to like, what is the vision? Is this a stepping stone to help us get there? So sometimes a project on its own won't, have it may have a quantitative return on investment, but I think, or it may not on its own, but it might help you sort of, whether it's build the data infrastructure that you need to be able to do your next goal, or to like learn from an analytics perspective, help you collect analytics, help you, get better at project management, and try something and create a process, and then be able to leverage that. So I think that there are sometimes, is this a strategic fit for some other way? And it's hard sometimes to know to be able to just calculate an ROI just financially.
Maybe I'll add a few things, Kyle, to that. Courtney, I totally agree. And I think Kyle asked this question to me as the nerdy accountant on the call to kind of throw up my screen, show you a bunch of graphs, show you how to calculate ROI. But I also thought of, some more qualitative ways of assessing this. Really, I think that the key is make learning one of the goals. Going back to something I said earlier, is having a culture that is always innovating and always changing. Is you're not going to bat 1,000%. You're going to have failures. And so how do you make learning a goal? So maybe your quantitative assessment is pretty break even. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense. But hey, let's try this and let's see if we learn something from it and helps us with our next goal or our next challenge. And then the second thing is, as you measure it later on, is really be flexible about the measurement criteria, right? So later on, there might have been an unintended benefit that you didn't consider at the time, or maybe you didn't get one of the benefits you wanted at the time, but you got something else. So make sure you're kind of considering those. An example, and I'm sure all of us on this call can think of something through the COVID pandemic, but 3 or 4 years ago, we went to a kind of paperless purchasing system, and it was really to help our field guys not deal with paperwork, created a little bit more work for our office staff, but we said it's worth it to take this kind of burden off of our field guys. March comes around, March 2020, and I have to send my office staff home, and but we have this paperless system, so we can work from home really easily. We never thought of that benefit, but we were able to gain it 2 or 3 years after we implemented a major change for our organization.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just tag on here as well. Ash's points are fabulous. I think maybe I'll just take it from a bit of a software perspective, and just talk a little bit about things like investing in a platform. Sometimes as opposed to point solutions, you can get a true sort of reduction in software cost. And so if you're reducing the amount of software cost that you have in your business, that can be a very easy quantitative measure. Reducing printing and paper cost, we don't think about that a lot in construction, but the more that we digitize that, back to Ash's point, the more that we go paperless, the more that we can save those costs that historically have just been built in. Qualitatively, again, it can be quantitative or qualitative, but things like reducing your risk as it relates to unapproved change orders, right? Like, what is the risk of that? And a lot of people don't truly know that because you don't know until it's hit your books. But if you could put in place a system that had the necessary controls and system and accountability, you can definitely mitigate some of that risk. The final thing that always comes to me as well is legal risk. We don't always talk about it too much, but if you really think about how much you pay in litigation costs today, but you have a centralized system of record that's reliable, that manages and houses all of the information about all of your projects, and you can use it in order to eliminate or mitigate some of those costs related to litigation, but that can be a big time, money, and risk saver for a lot of businesses, right? So just some ideas to think about, but there's a lot of different ways you can go on that, and I think everyone has a different feeling on what ROI truly looks like.
Amazing. Well, I know we're coming up at the end of the hour. We did get a late question coming in here. I will respond to that individual offline to make sure we get those questions answered. On behalf of BDO and CCA, I just want to thank each of you for taking an hour out of your day to listen to me speak for 20 minutes, and most importantly, provide your insight of the evolution of innovation within the industry. So thank you all so much, and thank you to those that have been on the line listening in and taking an hour out of your day to join us.